As the grey morning deepened over the riverbank, and the last echo of footsteps dissolved into the forest, Maya knew the world above had changed forever, and the danger beneath her feet was no longer alone in the dark. Long after the voices faded into the forest, Maya remained pressed against the wall, unable to draw a full breath. The silence around her felt too delicate, like a thin sheet of glass stretched tight over panic. Every creak of the old cabin made her flinch. Every whisper of wind made her think footsteps were circling back. She waited, counted heartbeats, listened for anything that might betray their return, but the clearing outside remained unnervingly still. Finally, slowly, she crept toward the window. She parted the dusty curtain just enough to see the tree line. The clearing where the men had stood was empty, but their presence lingered like a stain in the air, heavy and invasive. Her pulse throbbed painfully at the memory of their voices. If she found the vault, "We're behind schedule, we'll confirm movement." They hadn't spoken like men exploring a rumor. They hadn't spoken like locals curious about a newcomer. They had spoken like military, like hunters, like people with orders, and they knew about the vault, about her. Maya slid away from the window, careful to make no sound. She needed to think, but fear clouded every attempt. Thoughts collided, pulling her in conflicting directions. Run, hide, fight, disappear. Her breath came tight and shallow as she stared at the rug covering the trapdoor. The gold below had turned her from invisible to hunted overnight. She moved toward the far corner of the room, allowing the cabin's cold shadows to settle around her. She needed information, clarity, anything to make sense of why they were here, what they were searching for, and why they were tracking footprints near her home. Her gaze drifted to the worn leather journal she had taken from the drawer. She grabbed it with trembling fingers and thumbed through the brittle pages. Ink bled from years of moisture, but fragments remained, phrases that chilled her to the bone. They watched the cabin for months. They want the vault sealed until they decide otherwise. I can't leave. They know when I move. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't random. This wasn't new. The previous owner had been watched too. She paused on a page near the end. 3 lines scrawled in frantic handwriting. If strangers come, do not speak. Do not trust their uniforms. They are not what they claim to be. A tremor ran through her hands. The 2 men hadn't shown badges, but their posture radiated authority, authority without accountability. She closed the journal and pushed it away, the truth suffocating her. Whatever the vault contained, it was never meant to be lost. And those men weren't searching. They were recovering. Her mind raced. Had they been searching for her specifically, or had they simply found tracks near the river and guessed she'd discovered the vault? The thought of being watched made her skin crawl. She moved deeper into the cabin, every sense sharpened. The air felt electric with tension, as though the cabin itself held its breath with her. She pressed her ear against the front wall. Nothing, no rustling, no crunch of boots, just the distant hum of the river. Her fear eased, but only slightly, enough for her to act. She turned and lifted the rug. The trapdoor revealed itself like a wound reopening. The wood beneath was still cold, still humming faintly from the vault's restless stirring, a reminder that danger existed both above and below. She hesitated, torn between descending for answers or escaping for safety. But one thought held her still. If she fled now, they would track her. If she stayed, she might get trapped. Neither path felt survivable. A soft crunch of leaves outside froze her blood. Footsteps, slow, measured, returning. Maya bolted away from the trapdoor and extinguished the candle, plunging the room into dimness. She pressed herself against the darkest corner again, forcing her breath to quiet. The footsteps approached the porch. A voice murmured, different from before. A third man. She's here somewhere. The doors unbroken, check the windows. Maya's nails dug into her palm, 3 of them. Maybe more. She hadn't imagined being hunted. She had underestimated it. Another voice responded, the tall one she'd heard first. Orders are to confirm presence, not engage. If she's seen the vault, command wants her alive. A cold wave tore through her. Alive? For what? She clamped a hand over her mouth as the doorknob jiggled again. After this time, testing, listening, a second man whispered near the window, his breath fogging the glass. She's close. Tracks go straight to the porch and stop. Her body went rigid. Her tracks, in the grass, leading from the river to the cabin. She'd left a trail without realizing it. The taller man spoke again, voice low. We clear the ridge. If she's not there, we wait until nightfall and sweep again. They want the vault secure before the next storm. The next storm. Her heart sank. They weren't leaving. They weren't giving up. They were circling. The men moved away gradually, their voices fading into the trees. Boots crunched through the wet underbrush until the sound melted into the forest's muted stillness. Maya didn't move for a long time. Her breath shook, her pulse hammered, her thoughts screamed. But deep beneath the fear, one realization began to root itself. Running wasn't an option. Hiding wasn't sustainable. If they were watching the land, watching the cabin, watching her, then the only way to survive was to understand exactly what she was standing on, exactly what they wanted, exactly why the vault mattered. She lowered her gaze to the trapdoor again. She didn't want to go back down there, but she would have to, because now the danger wasn't the vault, it wasn't the gold, it wasn't the unknown. The danger was the men searching for her. As the day dimmed into the grey hush of late afternoon and the river whispered against the stones, Maya steadied her breath and understood the truth with unyielding clarity. The hunt had begun, and she would need to uncover every secret beneath her feet before the shadows outside closed in for good. After hours of holding her breath in corners and listening for footsteps that never truly faded from memory, Maya finally sat at the edge of the trapdoor, the rug pulled aside like a curtain revealing a second stage of her life she never auditioned for. The cabin around her felt smaller now, pressed inward, suffocating, as though the walls had absorbed every whispered threat from the men who searched the riverbank. They were somewhere out there still, watching, waiting, circling the property like wolves who had tasted a trail, and she knew they wouldn't stop. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened the worn journal she had rescued from the drawer days earlier, though it felt like a lifetime now. The leather cover was cracked, the pages yellowed and fragile. She held it carefully like something that might crumble into dust if mishandled. Yet this man, the one who lived here before her, had held it with desperation. His words, the ink, the indentations of his writing, all of it carried a tension she could feel through the page. She turned to the next section she hadn't yet read, a date scrawled in the top corner. Decades old, then a sentence that made her heartbeat slow, heavy. I hear them outside again, not every night, but enough. Maya swallowed hard and kept reading. They say they're military, but real military doesn't whisper, real military doesn't hide. Their uniforms don't match any branch I know, unmarked, untraceable. They're not here for protection, they're here for retrieval. Her breath thinned. Retrieval, the word clung to her like cold metal. She turned the page. The vault wasn't built by them. It was built long before. They only buried it deeper. Maya paused, her pulse stuttering. Long before. Before the cabin, before the owner vanished. She leaned closer to the dim light. My father told me the stories. The river was a route once, long before the government built roads. Boats came through at night carrying things that were never recorded, gold, weapons, documents, things meant to disappear. Her breath caught. This wasn't a random drop site. It was an artery, a hidden passageway used before laws could stop it. She read on, the words twisting her stomach. When the vault was first sealed, they told the workers it was a water purifier installation, a backup power room, a storm shelter, lies to keep them from asking questions. Maya's eyes narrowed. Every sentence peeled away another layer of the cabin's deception, like she was stripping years of paint off a wall only to find steel underneath. When I inherited the cabin, I didn't believe the stories until the first storm, until the dial moved, until I heard something behind the door. She froze. The previous owner had heard it too, the humming, the clicks, the shifting. She continued, her fingers gripping the edges of the journal. Sometimes I think it's not the gold that moves, it's something else, something sealed with it, something they don't want the world to see. Maya's pulse slammed tight in her chest. Something sealed with the gold. She turned the page urgently, needing more answers. I tried to report it. 3 times, no record was ever taken. Instead, they showed up at the cabin, the same men who watched the river. They told me to stop digging, stop asking, stop reading my father's notes. Her eyes burned with adrenaline. Notes, records, history erased. I tried to run once. They were waiting on the ridge. They always know when someone disturbs the vault. A chill raced down her spine. They always know. So I did the only thing left. I wrote everything down. If someone ever finds this journal, understand, the cabin isn't cursed. The land isn't cursed. The vault is. And the curse is made of men. Maya's breath faltered. Not ghosts, not myths. Humans, humans with power, humans with orders, humans who would kill for silence. She flipped the page, her heart pounding against her ribs like it wanted to break free from her chest. If you're reading this, they've already noticed you. Her blood went cold. Every hair on her arms rose as though touched by unseen hands. She could almost feel the forest listening outside, waiting for movement, waiting for another mistake. She read the final lines, shaky, rushed, the ink darker where the pen pressed hard. You won't hear them at first. They move like the river, quiet until it's too late. Whatever you do, don't open the vault further. Don't trust uniformed men without badges. Don't stay after sundown. A trembling breath escaped Maya's lips. It was sundown. It had been sundown hours ago, and she had already opened the vault. The journal slipped slightly in her hands. As if on cue, a sound cracked outside the window. A twig under a boot. Maya jerked upright, closing the journal with trembling fingers. The cabin froze with her. Every creak, every sigh of wind fell silent under the weight of that single sound. The shadows outside thickened. Voices murmured in the trees, closer than before, closer than they should be. Her breath thinned, her pulse roaring. The journal had warned her. The owner had warned her. Even the badge left behind had warned her. She wasn't imagining the danger. She wasn't misreading the fear. They were here. As the last light of dusk slipped behind the tree line and the forest swallowed its colors, Maya understood with chilling certainty that the next decisions she made wouldn't just determine her fate, they would determine whether she survived the night at all. The twig crackling outside the window was small, insignificant in any other world. But here, in this cabin that breathed warnings and hummed with secrets beneath its floorboards, the sound landed like a gunshot in Maya's chest. She pressed her spine against the wall, forcing herself to stay silent, her breath pulled thin and quiet between trembling lips. The journal's last words throbbed through her mind like a wound still open. You won't hear them at first. They move like the river, quiet until it's too late. Her eyes flicked to the window, to the darkness pooling outside like ink, spilled across the forest. The sun had vanished completely now, leaving nothing but a heavy wash of shadows stretching between the trees. The river whispered softly, a sound that should have soothed her, but now felt like a warning disguised as comfort. A low voice drifted through the night, quiet, measured, too close. She slid to the floor and crawled toward the darkest corner beneath the loft, her fingers cold against the worn wooden planks. Her breaths came shaky, but she swallowed them down, willing her body to stillness. The cabin walls seemed to lean inward, listening with her, holding the last bit of fragile silence together. Another voice answered, closer this time. Maya's heart thudded so hard she feared they'd hear it vibrate through the floorboards. She peered between the slats of the window frame. Two dark figures stood near the tree line, motionless. Another shape, a third man, walked a slow circle around the clearing, scanning the cabin with the precision of someone trained to notice what others miss. She ducked back, pulse spiking. They were surrounding the cabin, watching from multiple angles, waiting for a sign of movement inside. The journal had been right. It was always right. She crawled toward the trapdoor, not to descend, not to hide in the vault's shadow, but to protect the only evidence she had. The gold meant nothing without the truth surrounding it. The documents, the journal, the warnings, everything pointed to a story larger than herself, larger than this land, larger than anyone had dared admit. She lifted the rug and eased the trapdoor open with barely a creak. The cold rose like a breath from the earth itself, brushing her arms with a chill that felt strangely reassuring. It was danger she understood, danger that had been honest with her from the beginning. She reached into her backpack and pulled out the journal, its battered spine rough beneath her touch. She tucked it deep into one of the canvas pockets, zipping it tight. She added the documents she'd taken from the vault earlier. Papers stamped with secrecy, maps, logs she still hadn't deciphered. Pages full of truths someone wanted erased. The final item she pulled out was the scratched military badge, the one with the single word carved into the metal, "Run." She turned it in her hand once, feeling the etched grooves with her thumb, as though touching the fear of the man who carved them into steel. Then she tucked it into the bag as well. If they caught her, she wouldn't be caught helpless. Not without answers, not without proof. She sealed the floor again and pulled the rug back just as a beam of light swept across the outside wall of the cabin, a flashlight, cutting through the darkness with sharp precision. She froze, heart clawing at her throat. The beam paused on the window, held there. She pressed into the shadow beneath the loft, her body curling inward, muscles tight with restraint. The voice outside called quietly, deliberately, clear on the east side, no movement inside. Another responded from the right side of the clearing, west side clear. Tracks stop at the porch. Tracks, her tracks, the ones she'd left without thinking, when the fear had dragged her back inside earlier. The first voice spoke again, the tone colder than before. She's in there. Lights off. No noise. She's hiding. Maya's breath collapsed in her chest. He knew exactly where she was. Not in the woods. Not at the river, right here. She pressed a hand over her mouth, forcing her breath into silence. The men moved closer, boots sinking into the damp ground, gear rustling against their jackets. They weren't amateurs or wanderers. Their movements were too controlled, too measured. They carried the confidence of people who had done this before. The third man's voice floated through the dark, low and authoritative. Command wants her alive. They want questions answered. We breach if she runs. Hold positions. Alive. Questions, command. The words settled into her bloodstream like ice. She tightened her grip on the backpack strap. Every instinct screamed to flee through the back door, but she didn't move. She couldn't, not yet. Not while they had the cabin surrounded. The shadows outside rippled as the men repositioned, quiet as predators in tall grass. She didn't know how much time she had. Minutes, seconds. Her gaze swept the room in frantic calculation. Door, windows, loft, drawers, walls. Nowhere was truly safe. Then she spotted it, a sliver of space she'd overlooked before, behind the old stone fireplace. an indentation in the wall where bricks had loosened and shifted over time, not enough to hide her body, but enough to hide herself from sight. She crawled across the floor on her elbows, moving slowly, silently, feeling each board for creaks. Her breath tightened as she slipped behind the fireplace's shadow, pressing her body into the narrow gap. Just as she settled into stillness, a hand tested the doorknob, a soft metallic rattle. The cabin held its breath with her. The taller man's voice murmured one last command, muffled by the wood. "Stay alert, no mistakes. She has something we need. Something we need." The words drilled into her chest like a stake. They weren't after the gold, not primarily. They were after the truth surrounding it. The evidence, the journal, the documents. They wanted to control the story, rewrite it, erase it, and Maya was the last person alive who knew the whole truth existed. Outside, the footsteps quieted, the men faded into positions. Darkness swallowed their silhouettes, but they weren't gone. They were waiting. As the cabin sank into a heavy, suffocating silence, and the night closed its grip around the land, Maya realized with deep certainty that she was no longer surviving a mystery, she was surviving a hunt. The cabin had never felt smaller than it did in the hours after the men circled it like wolves. Maya hadn't slept. She hadn't even dared to close her eyes. Every breath she took felt borrowed, every minute stolen from people who believed she had something they owned, something they would kill to reclaim. Dawn never truly came. Instead, a thin gray light seeped across the treetops, weak and cold, barely pushing back the darkness clinging to the land. The river murmured restlessly as if urging her to choose a path, any path, before it was too late. Maya sat on the floor, her back against the wall, her legs pulled tight to her chest. The backpack sat beside her like a silent witness. The journal, the classified folders, the badge carved with RUN, all of it hidden but burning like a weight she could no longer ignore. She exhaled shakily. She couldn't keep hiding. They would return. They would find a way in, and when they did, she wouldn't have time to think, only to regret. Her gaze drifted to the trapdoor, the vault, the secret, the gold. That impossible fortune gleamed beneath her, untouched and waiting, a lifeline wrapped in danger. Her mind churned through possibilities, each more reckless than the last. She could take the gold and run. She could vanish before the unmarked men realized she was gone. A new life, far from this cabin, far from danger, far from everything that had stolen years from her. But even imagining it tasted wrong. Bitter, cowardly, because this wasn't just about survival anymore. The journal's warnings, the missing recovery teams, the classified documents buried in sealed crates, the footprints in the vault dust, the strangers stalking the property under darkness. It was bigger than her, so much bigger. The truth was an avalanche she could no longer escape. She pushed herself off the floor, pacing in slow, deliberate movements, her hands shaking slightly. The air in the cabin felt heavy with questions, questions she couldn't outrun no matter how far she fled. What was buried beneath her feet? Why had the government hidden it? Why had they killed, erased, hunted to protect it? And above all, why had fate dragged her here? Her eyes settled on the window overlooking the river, where morning fog curled low and ghost-like. The same river the journal said once carried silent shipments. The same river the men searched every night. The same river that had carried her here. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, breathing slowly. A long crack split the pane, spidering outward like a map of every path she'd been forced to walk. But this morning she realized something different. There was no one left to protect the truth except her. She pushed away from the window and stood straighter. The fear didn't disappear, but something deeper rose beneath it. Something fierce, something weary of running from life, from fate, from everything that had gone wrong before she ever bought this cabin. Maya grabbed the backpack. The zipper rasped softly as she checked its contents, the journal, the documents, the etched badge, proof of everything hidden, evidence of every lie. She hadn't chosen the vault. But she could choose what happened next. Her breathing steadied with a resolve she hadn't expected. Every moment of her life, every fear, every loss, every defeat, had been leading her to a precipice she had never seen until now. She wasn't going to flee with the gold. She wasn't going to hide until they caught her. She wasn't going to be another erased name in the forest. She was going to expose them, all of them. She moved through the cabin with sudden clarity, pulling whatever supplies she could find: flashlight, batteries, matches, the preserved maps from the drawer, even the cracked thermos still smelling faintly of stale coffee. Each item went into the backpack, turning the weight on her shoulders into a purpose she had never known. The old floor groaned beneath her as she crossed to the door. The morning fog thickened outside, hiding the world in gray silence. She listened, long enough to know the men weren't in the clearing, but not long enough to give doubt a chance to whisper in her ear. Her chest rose with a slow, determined breath. She wasn't just escaping the cabin. She was stepping into a fight she never asked for, but one she refused to let anyone else lose. Her hand closed around the doorknob, not as a victim, not as prey, but as someone who had made a decision the world would feel. She turned it carefully and slipped outside, boots touching the wet earth with soundless resolve. The river wind brushed her face, cold but clean, like a promise that the world beyond the trees had been waiting for her to wake up. She moved toward the woods, quiet, invisible, deliberate, and with each step into the mist, the truth of it settled deeper. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the vanished owner, for the missing teams, for every person erased by the men in unmarked uniforms. The gold was a spark. The truth was the fire, and she was done running from the flames. As the early light thinned across the riverbank and the forest swallowed her silhouette, Maya felt something new ignite inside her, an unshakable choice that would change everything, no matter the cost. The forest swallowed Maya as she slipped deeper between the trees, her breath forming thin clouds in the cool morning air. Fog curled around her ankles like pale fingers, weaving silently through the brush as though urging her onward. Every step carried the sharp awareness of danger, but underneath the fear, a new rhythm moved inside her. Eddy, fierce, undeniable. She wasn't fleeing. She was building distance. She was choosing the ground she wanted to stand on. Behind her, the cabin sat still in the gray mist, the roof glistening with dew, the walls quiet. It looked innocent, fragile even. No one would guess that beneath its floor lay a vault filled with unspeakable value and secrets that could shatter men in unmarked uniforms. Maya kept moving until the cabin was nothing more than a smudge behind the trees. Only then did she stop, pressing her back to a pine trunk and letting her heartbeat slow. She steadied her breathing, forcing herself to think beyond instinct. What she carried in her backpack wasn't simply evidence, it was leverage. She unzipped the bag and pulled out the classified folder again. The stamped warnings glared back at her, each one a reminder of how deep this conspiracy went. Operation Clearwater Confidential, not for distribution, recovery teams A and B status. Missing her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Not from weakness, but from the enormity of what she held. If these documents went public, if the journal's words reached the right hands, if the truth came to light, the men hunting her wouldn't just lose the gold, they would lose everything they had buried. A distant crack of branches snapped her attention upward. She ducked behind a fallen log, heart slamming into her ribs. Footsteps, slow, calculated. She held her breath and peered through the roots. A dark figure moved between the trees. Not hurried, not searching blindly, following a path she'd walked minutes ago. He crouched, examining the ground, tracking her. Maya's muscles tightened. She shifted carefully backward, placing each step with deliberate silence. The forest canopy muffled sound, but not enough to hide panic. She needed to move, now. She slipped between two thick pines, allowing the fog to swallow her outline. Her pulse hammered, breath sharp in her throat. Every instinct screamed to run, but she forced herself into quiet control. Running broke cover. Running got her caught. Running made noise. No, she had to outthink them, outmaneuver them. That's what the vanished owner had failed to do. She tightened the straps of her backpack and kept moving. East now, toward the narrow ridge the men had mentioned the night before. If they thought she might head that way, it meant there were fewer of them stationed there. A weakness, a gap, a place she could slip through. As she moved, the land shifted subtly beneath her. The forest pressed closer, the trees thickening into a natural maze. The river's murmur drifted faintly through the fog, guiding her like a thread of sound. She followed it until she reached a small clearing shaped by wind and stone. The river bent here, curving sharply around a cluster of moss-covered boulders. The edge widened into a shallow bank. Soft earth, smooth stones, a natural escape route. And a natural trap. Maya crouched behind a fallen cedar trunk, assessing the terrain. The river was too cold to cross quickly, and the water sat higher than usual from last night's storm. Crossing meant exposing herself, slowing herself, risking footprints they could follow downstream. But staying here meant being found. Her hand brushed the journal inside her bag. She felt the roughness of its worn leather cover, the weight of someone else's fear pressed into its pages. The previous owner had run too, but without a plan. Without proof, without anyone to hear him, she would not repeat his mistake. She looked around the clearing, mind racing. She needed distance, but also a way to control the next step. The men wanted her alive, for interrogation, for extraction, for silence. They would avoid harming her unless forced, but she didn't want to put that theory to the test. Then she saw it. A narrow deer trail disappearing between two giant spruce trees, nearly invisible unless someone knew the land. Dense brush lined both sides, forming a natural shield, a perfect place to slip through unnoticed. Maya didn't hesitate. She darted toward the trail, ducking beneath hanging branches, moving with a quiet urgency that kept her breath low and her steps light. The trail wound uphill, bending sharply as it climbed the ridge. Her legs burned, her lungs tightened, but she pushed harder, fueled by the weight of everything inside her packed. Ruth heavier than gold. When she reached the top, she paused and glanced back. Through the trees near the base of the hill, two silhouettes emerged from the fog, the men, searching, following, hunting, one of them bent down, fingers grazing the earth. Looking for her footsteps, her breath hitched. She crouched lower behind a cluster of brambles. Branches snagged her jacket, but she didn't move an inch. The men scanned the forest with sharp, predatory focus. She was outnumbered, outtrained, outarmed, but not outsmarted. She waited until their heads turned away. Thence, swift as instinct, she slipped deeper into the ridge's thick undergrowth, the forest swallowing her before they could glance back in her direction. Her heart pounded, but her mind was clear now, focused, alive with purpose. She didn't know how long she could stay ahead of them. She didn't know how far this conspiracy reached, but she knew exactly what she was going to do. She would take the truth out of these woods, into the world, into the light, not to the police. They were compromised, not to the government. They were the architects of the secret. She needed a voice no one could silence, a place where truth couldn't be buried. A platform bigger than the shadows hunting her. Her jaw tightened with resolve. She would expose everything, with evidence, with names, with proof, and she would do it on her terms. As the forest stirred behind her, and the river whispered warnings through the trees, Maya fled deeper into the wilderness, carrying the truth on her back, and a newfound fire in her chest that no amount of fear could extinguish. The forest carried her far enough from the cabin for her pulse to slow, but never far enough for safety. Even as Maya climbed the ridge's far side, breath tight and shallow, she could feel the men's presence stretching across the land like a tightening net. Their silence haunted the trees, their footsteps echoed in her memory, their orders clung to her like frost. They wanted her alive, alive, but contained, alive, but silenced. She reached a cluster of rocks overlooking the river and crouched low, watching the fog drift beneath her like a ghostly tide. Her muscles trembled, but not only from fear. This was purpose straining against the limits of her exhausted body. She wiped sweat and rain from her forehead, forcing her breathing into steady rhythms. The cabin was still visible in the distance, small, worn, almost peaceful in the gray morning light. But Maya knew the truth beneath its floorboards. The vault, the gold, the secrets, the darkness, and the hunters were closing in. She needed a plan. Running would only exhaust her. Hiding would get her cornered. Waiting would get her caught. But confronting them head-on, that might give her the only advantage she had left. Her gaze dragged across the land, replaying the paths she had taken, the deer trail, the river crossing, the ridge. She traced the men's likely patterns, their positions, their vulnerabilities. They were disciplined, methodical, but predictable. They expected her to run blindly, but Maya had stopped running the moment she chose to expose the truth. Her eyes returned to the cabin down below. Her enemy's greatest advantage was her greatest trap. If they were so certain she was inside, then inside is where she needed to be. Maya inhaled sharply at the realization. It was reckless, it was dangerous, it was exactly what they wouldn't expect. A surge of clarity sharpened her thoughts. She tightened her grip on the backpack strap and descended the ridge in silent, deliberate movements. The forest undergrowth muffled her steps, the fog concealing her outline as she approached the tree line behind the cabin. The clearing was empty, for now, but the forest whispered of footsteps not far away. The air vibrated with quiet intention. She crept around the back of the cabin, slipping between shadow and fog, staying low and silent. The cabin's old boards creaked in the wind as she eased herself toward the back window, the same one she had hidden behind the night they came. She peered inside. Nothing had been disturbed. Nothing had been moved. The trapdoor lay concealed beneath the rug. The journal's absence went unnoticed. The backpack rested against her shoulder, heavy with truth. She exhaled slowly, then she slipped through the window. Her boots landed on the wooden floor with a muffled thud. The cabin welcomed her with its familiar cold, the walls echoing faint remnants of the storm's hum. But it wasn't the same place she'd left hours earlier. It felt like a battleground, a sanctuary, a chessboard where the next move was hers. She checked the windows, front, side, back. No movement, just fog curling through the trees. But she knew they were out there, watching, waiting. She needed to prepare the cabin, fortify it, turn its weaknesses into traps, turn its hallways into narrow channels she could control. If they breached, she'd need every advantage. Her eyes fixed on the trapdoor. The vault below might be a labyrinth of danger, but its tunnels and metal corridors offered something she desperately needed. A defensive position. The vault door could hold back more than secrets. She knelt beside the rug and pulled it aside, revealing the faint outline of the trapdoor. Her fingers brushed the wood, feeling its cold tremor. This place had saved secrets for decades. Maybe, just this once, it could save her. She opened it slowly. Cold air rushed up, ancient, metallic, humming faintly with the vault's restless pulse. She descended the stairs with steady breaths, feet landing on the lower platform with quiet finality. Inside the vault chamber, the gold glimmered like forbidden sunlight, but she stepped over it without a second glance. Her focus moved to the structure itself. The thick walls, the steel door, the crates, the tools the previous recovery teams had left behind. Metal rods, weathered crates, bars from dismantled shelving, and dozens of heavy gold bricks. Not money, not treasure, weights, counterbalances, barriers. Her jaw tightened. She had everything she needed. She hurried back up the stairs and began pulling items from the storage closet. The drawers, the rusted hooks along the wall, old nails, splintered boards, a broken chair leg, coils of rope, rusty hinges. Pieces of a cabin that had once lived a simple life, now conscripted into a defense she had no choice but to build. Each piece became part of a plan, a barricade, a trap, a warning. She moved through the cabin as though she'd lived here for years, laying out ropes and securing pressure points on the floor that creaked the loudest. She built anchors near the windows, fixed boards into narrow choke points, reinforced the trapdoor. Thunder rumbled in the distance, not a storm, not the vault. Voices. She ducked beneath the window, listening. Check the perimeter again. She's close. We sweep the cabin at my signal. Keep your weapons low. They want her alive, alive. Alive, alive. The word no longer frightened her. It fueled her. She tightened the last knot on the rope trap and positioned herself near the table, her breath steady despite the shaking in her hands. The forest grew quiet, too quiet. The clearing shifted, boots pressed into the damp grass. A shadow moved across the porch. A voice, calm, authoritative, final, commanded, breach. Maya's pulse sharpened. Her trap set, her decision made, her fear buried beneath defiance. They thought she was powerless. They thought she was cornered. They thought she was alone. They were wrong. As the door shuddered under the first impact and the cabin seemed to inhale for the fight ahead, Maya stood ready, no longer the hunted, but the woman who had chosen her ground. The first blow struck the front door like a thunderclap, sharp, violent, shuddering through the cabin's bones. Dust drifted from the ceiling in tiny clouds as Maya pressed her back against the wall. Heart pounding in a slow, deliberate rhythm she forced herself to maintain. Everything she'd set in place now hung on the tension of a single breath. Another impact, then another. The hinges groaned under the pressure, wood splintering in thin cracks along the frame. The cabin felt smaller with each hit, the walls tightening like lungs running out of air. Maya steadied her grip on the broken chair leg she'd sharpened into a makeshift lever. Not a weapon. She had no illusions about taking armed men down, but a tool. A trigger for the rope trap she'd rigged across the entryway. Boots thudded against the porch. Voices murmured on my count. Keep formation. No shots unless necessary. She's inside. She has nowhere to go. They were confident, unhurried, already convinced of their victory. A final blow cracked the door inward, one hinge snapping completely free. The bottom corner scraped across the floorboards as it swung open with a slow, groaning sigh. Fog drifted into the cabin along with the cold morning air. Then silence, a silence so sharp it felt like a blade. The first agent stepped through, tall, expressionless, unmarked uniform, shoulders tense with command. He crossed the threshold precisely as Maya pulled the rope from behind the wall. The trap triggered instantly. A heavy cross beam weighted with metal rods and the heft of 3 gold bricks she'd secured at each end, swung down with brutal force from the rafters. The man ducked, but not fast enough. The beam clipped his shoulder, slamming him sideways into the wall with a grunt of pain. His weapon hit the ground. He did not. He staggered but remained standing. These men were trained for impact, but the moment of confusion was all she needed. Maya darted back into the shadows, breath controlled, body moving on instinct. 2 more agents rushed in behind him. They stormed through the doorway and directly onto the pressure board she'd placed beneath the rug. A hidden nail hinge snapped under the weight, releasing the board's tension. Another trap, a net weighted with tools from the vault's storage crates, dropped from the loft overhead, collapsing onto the 2 men and driving them to their knees beneath the tangled mess of rope and metal. Shouts erupted. One managed to free an arm. Another kicked against the ropes, but the 3rd agent, the one who had taken the beam to the shoulder, recovered quickly. He barked a command, "Secure the interior. She's here." Maya's heart slammed hard. Time was running thin. Her traps had slowed them, but not stopped them. The lead agent drew a baton from his belt, turning toward the deeper shadows of the cabin. Maya backed slowly toward the trapdoor, each breath a silent thread of determination. If they forced her down there, she'd be cornered. But if she reached the steel vault door first, she could lock them out, at least long enough to escape through the secondary tunnel she'd suspected but hadn't yet found. The agent advanced. Maya slipped deeper into the shadows, movement precise and silent. The cabin's narrow hallways worked in her favor. She stepped lightly between floorboards she'd memorize, avoiding the ones that groaned, and reached the trapdoor just as the agent's flashlight beam swept past her shoulder. She dropped into the opening without hesitation. Her boots struck the steps, and she descended fast, gripping the railing as her breath tore in shallow bursts. Shouts echoed above, boots crashing against wood as the men freed themselves from the net. Down the floor hatch. "She's heading to the vault. Cut her off." Their voices thundered through the small cabin like a closing cage. Maya reached the bottom landing and swung into the vault chamber. The cold slapped her skin like a warning, but she didn't slow. She sprinted across the concrete floor, past the gold, past the crates, toward the steel door, still open from earlier. Every second counted. Every heartbeat was borrowed. She threw her weight against the door. It didn't budge. The mechanism hummed, still active from the storm, triggered shift. Its gears had reset partially, stuck halfway between locked and open. Panic clawed at her throat. She shoved again, muscles shaking. Footsteps pounded down the stairs behind her. No time, no room to think. She grabbed a gold bar from the nearest stack. Heavy, almost too heavy, but she lifted it with desperation fueling her muscles. She jammed it into the seam between the steel door and the wall, using it as leverage. The metal groaned in protest. Footsteps hit the lower platform. "Stop, you can't get out." She pulled with everything she had. The vault door finally gave slamming shut with a deafening metallic roar, just as the 1st agent lunged toward her. A thud struck the other side. A shout of frustration. A heavy fist slammed into steel. They were locked out. For now. Maya stumbled backward, gasping for air as the vault trembled with the force of fists hammering the other side. Her flashlight beam skittered across the cement floor in frantic arcs. She'd bought herself seconds, maybe a minute, before they breached the cabin and forced another entrance. Her light swept across the back of the vault toward the place she'd avoided until now, a wall of shadow. Deeper than the rest, different somehow, a faint seam, a door, not part of the original design, not part of the gold storage, a secondary access passage, an escape route. She knew it, she felt it. This was how the owner had vanished. She ran toward it, breath ragged, heartbeat sharp as a blade. Behind her, fists slammed the steel vault door again. Metal cracked under the force. Voices roared orders through the barrier. Get the cutting gear. Don't let her reach the tunnel. Maya grabbed the edge of the hidden panel, fingers gripping cold steel. The cabin above shook with movement. The vault shuddered. The tunnel door began to give way as Maya slipped into the darkness beyond. The cabin erupted with a final, shattering crash, and she knew the true siege had only begun. The tunnel swallowed Maya in cold darkness, the air sharp with metallic dust and the lingering echo of lives that had passed through before her. Behind her, the vault door shook beneath the relentless pounding of fists and metal tools, each impact a warning that time was bleeding out fast. The walls vibrated with their fury, muffled shouts, commands barked into radios, boots slamming on steel. But ahead of her, the darkness breathed something else, a possibility, a path carved by someone desperate enough to hide the truth and hopeful enough to leave a way out. Maya tightened her grip on the flashlight, its trembling beam carving a thin ribbon of light through the narrow passage. Every step felt like it carried the weight of the journal, the documents, the truth she had stuffed into her backpack, the truth the world had been denied for decades. Her voice trembled with each breath, but her resolve didn't. She wasn't running anymore. She was delivering. The tunnel dipped downward sharply, forcing her to steady herself against the cold concrete walls. Her boots splashed through thin puddles left by years of condensation. Rusted pipes lined the ceiling, some dripping water in slow, rhythmic taps that echoed like a ticking clock. The passage twisted, turned narrowed again. It was built to be forgotten, built for secrecy, built for emergencies no one would ever admit existed. But it led somewhere. It had to. After what felt like endless minutes, the tunnel widened into a small chamber, barely big enough for one person. An old metal hatch stood on the far wall. Its surface was streaked with rust, but the locking wheel looked functional. Maya turned it with trembling hands. It resisted, then surrendered. Cold dawn air surged in through a crack, carrying the sense of pine, river water, and freedom. She pushed the hatch open and emerged into the forest behind the ridge, far beyond where the men had been searching. The world outside was washed in pale morning light, the sky bruised purple and blue from a night of violence and fear. Mist drifted through the pines, softening the sharp edges of the land. But the moment she stepped fully outside, reality sharpened again. The valley stretched out before her, the river winding across it like a silver scar, the small town visible miles away, tiny rooftops clustered like pieces on a map. That town had something she needed. A news station, old, underfunded, barely functioning, but still alive, still broadcasting. Her breath steadied, her mind cleared. She could walk into that station, deliver the journal, the documents, the evidence, and speak a truth that no amount of military secrecy could contain once the broadcast reached thousands of screens. She cinched the backpack straps tighter and began moving, her boots cutting a path through the dew-drenched grass. The forest thinned as she descended the ridge, each step pulling her farther from the cabin, and closer to the unknown future waiting in town. Behind her, the cabin exploded into chaos. A distant boom cracked through the air like a gunshot, reverberating through the valley. Birds scattered from treetops in frantic swarms. Smoke lifted between the pines as the vault's outer frame buckled under the cutting saws and detonators the men had used. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. She already knew what she'd see. Armed agents tearing through the cabin, weapons out, voices roaring orders, boots crushing floorboards above the now exposed vault. They'd find it empty. They'd find the gold untouched. They'd find the tunnel, and they'd know she was gone. A second explosion shook the ground faintly as she reached the bottom of the ridge. Her pulse spiked, but not with fear, with purpose, with the ferocity of someone who had survived the worst night of her life and refused to let the truth die in the dirt behind her. The road leading into town curved out from behind the trees, cracked and weathered. A faded wooden sign leaned crookedly at its edge. Welcome to Rivershore population, scratched out, prosperity, long gone, secrets far too many. Maya stepped onto the pavement, feeling the weight of every decision press into her shoulders, and the fire of every reason inside her chest. She tightened her jaw and moved forward, quickening her pace. She would not be silenced, not now, not when the world needed to hear what she'd seen, what she'd uncovered, what people had died protecting. The truth was in her hands, and she was walking straight into the light with it. As the rising sun began to cut through the valley's fog, Maya crossed the threshold into town, unaware that the broadcast she was about to ignite would send shockwaves far beyond the river, the cabin, and the men who thought they controlled the shadows. Maya moved through the outskirts of Rivershore with a quiet determination that burned hotter than fear. The town was just beginning to wake, dim porch lights flickering on, a dog barking somewhere in the distance, the smell of wet asphalt lingering from the storm. But beneath the sleepy stillness, Maya felt something else pulsing through the streets. A chance, a final one, and she was racing toward it before the shadows behind her caught up. Her boots struck the pavement in steady rhythm as she approached the squat, weather-beaten building that housed Rivershore Community Broadcasting, the smallest, most overlooked local station in the entire valley. Its faded sign buzzed softly in flickering neon, the red letters glowing erratically against the pale blue morning. Most people ignored this place. Most people barely remembered it existed. But that insignificance was exactly what Maya needed. The men hunting her would never expect her to run toward a broadcast station, and once her words hit the airwaves, even through an old local channel, there would be no erasing it. She jogged across the cracked concrete lot, her breath visible in the cold morning air. Her fingers tightened around the straps of her backpack, feeling the weight inside. Documents, evidence, truth. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was a lifeline. The front doors were unlocked. Small towns rarely needed to fear break-ins. Until now, Maya pushed the door open quietly. A soft electronic chime rang out, echoing through the lobby. She froze, listening. No shouting, no footsteps, no agents bursting through the windows. Only silence. She exhaled shakily. The interior smelled of old carpet, stale coffee, and years of dust settling over forgotten equipment. A receptionist's desk sat empty. A stack of mail slumped against the wall. Papers rustled in the faint breeze from a vent overhead. She moved quickly down the corridor, passing doors labeled Control Room Editing Suite Studio B, Sound Booth, then Studio Alive. Her heart lurched. Inside, through the small rectangular window, an elderly man sat before a microphone, adjusting knobs with the familiarity of decades spent doing what he loved. He was one of those voices the town had grown up with, the kind that narrated weather updates and school closures long before apps or alerts existed. His face creased with calm concentration. He didn't know the world was shifting outside. He didn't know danger was spreading through the valley. He didn't know the truth was about to walk through his door. Maya pushed inside. The man startled, turning sharply toward her. His hand hovered over the switchboard, his eyes widening at the sight of a young woman covered in dirt, fear, river mist, and resolve. "Miss, this is a live studio. Are you all right?" His voice trembled with concern, not suspicion. Maya swallowed hard. "There are people coming," she whispered. "Men, they can't find me yet. I need your broadcast, right now." He blinked, confused. "Broadcast what?" She pulled the journal from her pack. The documents, the military files, the badge carved with RUN. The old man's expression changed instantly. His eyes sharpened. His breath stalled. She didn't need to explain. Some truths don't wait for permission. He stood slowly, his hand trembling as he pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Lock the door," he said. Maya did. She slid every bolt into place, her hands shaking not with fear, but with adrenaline. Determination, relief that someone, finally, was willing to listen. The man hurried to the mic and flicked a switch. A red light blinked on. "Live," he gestured. "Say what you need to say." Maya stepped toward the microphone, her reflection trembling faintly in the soundproof glass. She felt the weight of the valley, the cabin, the river, the vault, every secret pressed into her bones. She inhaled, slow, deep, and let her voice rise. "People of Rivershore, my name is Maya Brooke." Her voice echoed through the studio, strong despite the fear clawing at her chest. "I was forced into hiding last night by armed men with unmarked uniforms. They aren't law enforcement. They aren't here to protect us." She held up the folder, opening it. Pages rustled. "They're here because of what I found beneath my cabin. Something buried by the government, something they plan to recover in secret." Her voice grew steadier with every word. "Millions in gold, lost, hidden, stolen, and documents that prove decades of cover-ups, missing recovery teams, and a vault built for reasons no one ever told the public." Her heartbeat quickened, but her voice did not break. "They tried to silence the man who owned that cabin before me. He vanished. They've tried to silence anyone who's gone near that vault, and now they're trying to silence me." The old man stared at her through the glass eyes wide, disbelief turning slowly into conviction. Maya lifted the badge. "If you're listening to this, you need to know the truth. You deserve the truth, and I won't run from it anymore." She stepped closer to the mic. "I'm uploading everything I have to your station servers. Every document, every proof, every detail." Her voice lowered with gravity. "And if something happens to me, if you hear that I went missing, don't believe it." She exhaled, trembling. "Play the recordings, share the files, let the world see what they buried." The old broadcaster hit the switch to archive the live feed, sending her words into permanent storage. Then outside, a single sound cracked the air. Car doors slamming, multiple, fast, too close. Maya's blood froze. Through the slits in the blinds, black vehicles rolled into the lot. No markings, no lights, no hesitation. The old man whispered, voice breaking, "They're here." Maya's heart kicked hard, but she didn't falter. Not now, not after everything. Her words had gone out. Her truth was on the airwaves. Her evidence was uploading. They were too late. She turned toward the nearest exit door, the one that led to the back alley. Her final words slipped into the mic as she moved. "I'm not done fighting." As she ran from the studio and the sound of boots storming the hallway thundered behind her, Maya knew the silence that had suffocated this valley for decades had finally cracked, and the world was about to hear it break wide open. In the weeks that followed the broadcast, the world transformed faster than the river could carry its own current. Maya felt it in the air, in the ground, in every headline that rippled outward like shockwaves crossing a once silent valley. Her voice, trembling, urgent, defiant, had reached more people than she ever dreamed possible. It threaded through radios, television screens, online streams, and late-night news specials. Her truth had outrun the shadows. Her words had toppled the silence, and for the first time in a very long time, Maya felt safe enough to breathe, but even safety felt unfamiliar. The agents who hunted her were gone, arrested, exposed, stripped of the power they had used to smother entire decades of history. Their command posts had been raided, their files seized, and the stolen gold removed from the earth under the watchful eyes of investigators, historians, journalists, and a public hungry for answers. The world Maya had stepped into was not the same one she ran through that desperate, terrifying night, and neither was she. Now, as she walked the familiar path along the riverbank, the one she had once taken with fear humming at her heels, She felt the earth soften under her boots. Leaves rustled in the mild breeze, shaking loose the last hints of winter. The river shimmered with a warm, sun-kissed glow, gentler now, as if unburdened by the secrets it once guarded. She paused at the edge of the water. The current murmured, slow, steady, eternal. Her reflection wavered in the surface, older somehow, not in years but in understanding. The exhaustion that once carved shadows beneath her eyes had faded, replaced by something quieter, something lighter. Peace. She sat on a smooth boulder near the shoreline, pulling her knees close to her chest. The river glided past her, carrying memories she couldn't see, but could somehow feel. Stories the water had held long before she arrived, and would continue to hold long after she was gone. Somewhere behind her, footsteps approached, low, careful, respectful of the quiet she'd found. She didn't turn. The soft voice that followed needed no introduction. "You picked a beautiful spot," the investigator said, settling onto a nearby stone. He wasn't one of them. He was from the Independent Task Force, the group that had taken over the case after her broadcast shattered the cover-up. He had spoken to her countless times over the last month, always gentle in tone, always steady in his belief in her. Maya nodded, eyes still on the water. "It helped me survive," she murmured. "This river was the only thing that didn't lie to me." He absorbed that, his silence thoughtful. "The committee wants to speak with you again," he said softly, "about the final decision." Maya inhaled deeply, letting the scent of pine and river moss settle into her lungs. She knew what final decision meant. The reward, $75 million worth of gold, now reclaimed, authenticated, secured. It belonged to no one who survived, legally unclaimed, historically significant, politically radioactive. By international law, and after weeks of debates, public hearings, and pressure from journalists who refused to let her story fade, officials had offered it to her, as compensation, as restitution, as a symbolic gesture of justice. $75 million, enough to rewrite her life entirely, enough to erase every hardship she'd ever endured, enough to build a future so far from this river she'd never have to look back. But looking back was the only reason she'd survived. She dipped her fingers into the cool stream, watching ripples widen and drift. "I don't want the money," she said quietly. The investigator didn't respond at first. He'd expected this. He just needed to hear her say it. "The world doesn't need another story about someone getting rich," Maya added. "It needs a reminder of what happens when truth gets buried." She turned her head toward him finally. "I want the cabin preserved," she said. "Not rebuilt, not polished, not turned into a tourist circus. Preserved exactly as it is. Monument to truth and to what happens when people choose silence over justice." The investigator's expression softened. "And you?" he asked gently. "What do you want for yourself?" Maya looked back toward the river. For a long time she didn't speak. The wind brushed her hair. The water drifted past her boots. Birds called from the upper branches of the birches. Everything felt impossibly quiet, impossibly alive. What did she want? She wanted rest. She wanted to breathe without fear. She wanted to live without running. She wanted a life that wasn't built on survival, but on choice. "I want to stay here," she finally said, her voice barely louder than the current. "Not in the cabin, not in the vault's shadow, but here, near the river. I want to build something honest on land that tried to bury too much." The investigator nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "I think that's exactly what the world needs to hear," he said. He stood, brushing pine needles from his slacks. "We'll honor your request." Maya remained seated as he walked back toward the forest. She didn't need to go with him, not yet. For now, she had the river. The water slid, passed with an ancient softness, reflecting the emerging sunlight in ripples of gold. Not the gold that had once been hidden in the earth, but the gold that belonged to the world. The gold no one could steal, the gold that illuminated truth. Maya closed her eyes. The river remembered everything, and now, so would the world. As the morning warmed and the current carried its quiet secrets toward the horizon, Maya felt certainty settle inside her like sunlight through leaves. Her story hadn't ended at the cabin. It had only just begun here, at the edge of the river that had always known the truth. Maya stayed by the river long after the investigators' footsteps faded into the woods, letting the sounds of the valley wrap around her like a long, overdue embrace. The world finally felt quiet, not the dangerous, suffocating silence she had known beneath the cabin, but a natural stillness made of wind and water and soft morning light. She ran her fingers along the surface of the stream again, tracing the cool path of the current. Small circles of ripples spread outward, merging with the flowing water in the same way her story had merged with the world beyond the valley. Once, she had been a woman fighting the collapse of her own life, clinging to $2 and a sliver of hope. Then she became a witness to darkness, a keeper of secrets, a target, a survivor. Now, she was something else entirely, a voice that had broken a decades-long silence. The trees rustled gently, their branches swaying as if acknowledging the shift inside her. She took a slow breath, her chest rising with the soft certainty she'd earned through every terrifying step of her journey. For the first time since she bought the cabin, her future no longer felt like a dark doorway. It felt like a sunrise. She stood and walked along the riverbank, following the winding path where golden sunlight broke through the canopy in soft patches. Birds glided overhead. A pair of deer watched her from the brush, their ears flicking but eyes calm. Even the forest felt changed, as though it recognized the burden she had carried and now welcomed her with open, ancient roots. When she reached the clearing, she paused. Across the shallow rise, the cabin came into view, leaning, weather-worn, scarred by the siege, but still standing. A handful of officials, historians, and preservation workers moved carefully around it, marking sections with tape, photographing structural beams, sketching outlines. No one entered without reverence. Someone had hung a sign on the porch rail, "Site protected under Historical Preservation Act, authorized personnel." Only Maya's breath caught softly. The cabin that once hid a secret, the cabin she had stepped into with nothing but desperation, was becoming something greater than its broken walls. Not a tourist attraction, not a monument of fear, but a reminder that truth could be buried, but never erased, not as long as someone was willing to dig, not as long as someone was willing to speak. She approached slowly. The workers stepped aside, recognizing her immediately, not because of fame or spectacle, but because of respect. She nodded to them quietly and climbed the uneven steps to the porch. The old boards creaked beneath her weight, humming a familiar greeting. She opened the door and stepped inside. The dust had settled, the air was still, and despite the violence that had torn through it, the cabin felt calm, like it finally understood its purpose. Sunlight slipped through the windows, illuminating flecks of dust suspended in the air like tiny golden stars. They drifted peacefully, painting soft halos of light across the floorboards, right where she had once uncovered the mark that changed everything. She knelt beside it. Her fingertips hovered above the worn grain, remembering the echo that first spoke to her from below, the hollow sound that led her into darkness and ultimately into truth. She whispered to the silence, almost a prayer, almost a promise, "I won't forget." Her voice trembled with warmth, not fear. She stood and moved toward the back window, pushing it open gently. A breeze carried through the cabin, stirring the lingering dust into a soft drift, cleansing, renewing, like a breath of forgiveness moving through the space. Maya stepped outside again and followed a narrow path leading away from the cabin. The sun was rising higher now, washing the valley in gold, but not the kind hidden in vaults. This gold belonged to the world. She walked until she reached the ridge where the land sloped toward open fields. The wind played gently with her hair. Her eyes burned, not with tears, but with gratitude. She had survived. She had spoken. She had changed everything, but she wasn't alone anymore. Voices echoed faintly from the town below, radio broadcasts recounting her story. Townspeople gathering around river shores revived attention. Reporters, investigators, volunteers offering support. For the first time, the valley felt alive with truth instead of shadows. Maya closed her eyes, letting the moment wash through her. Her life was no longer defined by fear, no longer shaped by secrets, no longer written in the dark. There would be challenges ahead, interviews, inquiries, a world demanding answers. But she would face them with the strength she had earned along the river, in the cabin, in the vault, in the broadcast studio where her voice broke the silence of an entire nation. She placed a hand over her heart, feeling its steady, calm beat. The river had remembered everything. Now the world did too. Maya turned toward the path leading into town, stepping forward with quiet certainty, not running, not hiding, but walking into the life she had reclaimed. And as the warm breeze carried sunlight across the valley, Maya knew this truth with unshakable clarity. The story wasn't ending here. It was flowing forward, like the river, into whatever future she chose to build.